I want to begin my comments by expressing my deep pessimism about the future of the university. Lately, I found myself glad to be nearing retirement. So dismaying are the changes in the structure and definition of the institution I've been happily associated with these many long years. This may put me in the camp of what Rector van der Zwaan called the romantic or nostalgic model, although my view of the university is not an ivory tower, but a critical force in relation to society, a force for change. Whatever we call it, bureaucratization, corporatization, neoliberalization, globalization, the university I once knew, that I grew up in, is an increasingly alien place. It's a place where market calculations increasingly prevail, where the language of strategic planning and accounting is replacing the grand mission statements of old, those university mottos, truth to its innermost parts, knowledge, the sun of the mind, or my favorite, the University of Wisconsin motto, where I got my PhD, which talks about that continual and fearless sifting and winnowing by which truth alone can be found. All of those are somehow being replaced, and pedagogy's inevitable inspirations are becoming so many tangible services rendered for a fee. Universities are referred to increasingly as knowledge economies these days, knowledge conceived as packages of information dispensed to student consumers, but also offered to corporations as a return on their investment in faculty research. Collaborative corporate university partnerships are growing, and the control of research results is increasingly in the hands of corporations. Within the university itself, administrators are, in the best traditions of corporate proprietary interest, claiming a share of the products developed by faculty in their employ. I may be giving you the extreme view from the United States. Most of what I'm saying is based on American universities. For example, at the University of Chicago, faculty who refuse to sign over rights to their intellectual property are penalized by denials of promotion and administrative refusal to sign off on their grant applications. I'm on the Committee on Academic Freedom and Tenure of the American Association of University Presidents, and we just got a letter from this University of Chicago faculty person saying, what do I do? She is a humanist, not a scientist. This past summer, I was particularly struck by the changed environment as it affected two of my former students. One, a brilliant assistant professor in a history department, up for tenure at a public university in the United States. The other, an equally brilliant senior lecturer in the history of science, who applied for promotion at his English university. The chair of the committee considering the tenuring of the assistant professor wrote to me in my capacity as the editor of a new journal, asking for our rates of submission, acceptance, and rejection of articles. With that information, he wanted to judge the value of an article that had been published by the candidate. When I told him that we were a new journal, that the article was published in the first issue, and that in any case we didn't intend to keep those statistics, he replied that he was only following the assessment procedures at his university. When I further explained that we had solicited the article for the first issue of the journal because we wanted to showcase the best of what outstanding young scholars were producing, he thanked me, but it was clear that my comments about quality would be less useful than the quantitative measures he felt he needed to provide. In the second case, the request for promotion by the senior lecturer, author of 2 books and many articles, was turned down on quantitative grounds. They wanted yet another book. As you surely know, British universities, since the reign of Margaret Thatcher, depend for resources on their competitive rankings in what is now called the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, an entirely quantitative measure of the value of faculty output. My former student, impressively active and productive, internationally known for the work he does, was told that although the promotions panel had no question about the quality of his efforts, he had not done enough to add to his university's REF rating. Which raises the question of what the term excellence means, of what it is that's being assessed when we talk about the impact of higher education and of how it's being assessed. The late Bill Reddings, whose 1996 book, The University in Ruins, is still by far the best analysis I've read of the restructuring of the university, says that in this usage, quote, excellence has no external referent or internal content. The University of Excellence, as he calls it, is a place where, quote, Excellence names a non-referential principle that allows the maximum of uninterrupted internal administration, end of quote. Redding's book is prescient in so many ways. Well, I reread it preparing this talk, and I thought he anticipated many of the things that have seemed to have appeared only in the last couple of years. But think of the centers of excellence that now dot European university campuses. Excellence, an empty term under whose auspices scholars conduct all manner of loosely related projects, some of them of high quality, others not. If you've ever been an evaluator of one of these proposals for a university of excellence, you'll remember the many questions about outcome and impact, which assume that as on an assembly line, there can be precise measures of the relationship between input and output. Or take the new term for the British rating system. It used to be the Research Assessment Exercise, RAE. Now it's the Research Excellence Framework. In this process of expert review, and I'm now quoting, I'm going to quote a lot because the language is so revealing that it needs no commentary. But according to the REF, the process of expert review, quote, subpanels will apply a set of generic assessment criteria and level definitions to produce an overall quality profile for each institution, end of quote. Another quote, the assessment outcomes provide benchmarking information and establish reputational yardsticks. Needless to say, quality is taken to be a quantifiable entity. Or take the latest efforts of some American disciplinary associations to rank journals and publishers on scales of excellence in order to weigh the achievements of individual faculty. The quality of the book or article judged not by its substance, not by peer review of its quality, but entirely by the standing of the press or the journal that published it. Measuring excellence has become big business in the American academy, at least. The assessment movement, as one critic refers to it, has found a profitable market niche in university administrations. Most universities in the United States now have Offices of Academic Assessment, OAA. You can, if you Google Office of Academic Assessment, almost every university in the United States will come up, and you'll find, if you're at an American university, what your office does. They all have teams of experts, very few of them academics, available to help faculty develop appropriate plans. There's also a National Association of Academic Assessment Professionals that coordinates and standardizes these activities. Most OAAs are exactly the same and employ the same terminology. NYU's definition of its Office of Academic Assessment is typical, quote, the OAA is responsible for shaping and reinforcing the NYU student learning assessment system, ensuring that processes of making information-based enhancements to student learning are continuous and sustainable. Reporting directly to NYU's academic leadership, the OAA collaborates with the Office of Program Review and the Office of Institutional Research to provide decision-making bodies with key insights from aggregated course program and institutional level student learning assessment results. I can barely read it. The jargon of it is so, I mean, people criticize some of us who do too difficult theoretical work because the language is so abstruse. I find this much harder to read than difficult theoretical work. In any case, the hydra-headed administrative monster ingesting big data sustains what the University of Southern Maine OAA officials call a culture of evidence, according to which learning outcomes are judged and, quote, programmatic adjustments may be made most effectively. Redding's comment is that here, an administrative logic of evaluation replaces the interplay of teaching and research that once were central to the function of the university. It should also be noted that these administrative evaluators help account for more than a third of the dramatic increase in the cost of higher education over the past 25 years. As professors on tenure tracks, full professors with permanent life tenure are being replaced increasingly by adjuncts, contingent employees who can be hired and fired at will, the numbers of administrators in these kinds of positions are increasing exponentially. As if these measures weren't enough, lucrative plans to extend the reach of assessment abound. Last year, state legislators in Iowa mandated continuous improvement reporting for all courses at state universities. Quote, for each undergraduate course, the institution shall collect and use the results of formative and summative assessments in its continuous improvement plan, end of quote, the legislation reads. Quote, the board shall annually evaluate the effectiveness of the plans and shall submit an executive summary of its findings and recommendations in its annual strategic plan progress report, a copy of which shall be submitted to and judged by the General Assembly, end of quote. And there's a new proposal from the US giant testing firms, the educational testing service among them, those who give the SATs and the graduate record exams and all the rest, to provide certificates of competency to supplement college degrees for potential employers. According to one report, officials from the testing firms said, quote, they're responding to the accountability push in higher education, which seeks better, more detailed measures of student learning than college grading alone can provide. The idea is that there are numerical indicators that can guarantee the quality of our product, the student with a college degree, whether it be a course, a curriculum, or the college graduate, him or herself. In Redding's terms, accountability is a synonym for accounting in the academic lexicon. What was once a vision of the social responsibility of the university, its accountability to contribute to the public good, is now a matter of services provided to individuals, their ultimate worth calculated in monetary terms or their equivalent, salaries, jobs, time to graduation, marketable skills. It's not that assessment itself is new. In the university we're fast losing, grades were an admittedly subjective measure of student accomplishment, mastery, and creativity. In the best of circumstances, they suggested something about a student's quality of mind rather than the quantity of information he or she had absorbed. And they emerged from a student-faculty relationship that was the heart of the educational experience. The nature of the relationship depended, of course, on the subject matter and the discipline. In the humanities, it was a capacity for reflection, curiosity, and imagination that gained recognition. Thinking critically also mattered, but it does so too in the sciences. How else could innovation happen? For faculty, publish or perish was an accurate description of the rules of the game, but peer review and discussions of the substance of the work counted for something. Here again is Redding's, quote, judgment is better understood in relation to a continuing discussion of value and quality rather than as a finality. Even though the discussion at any point may have ended an individual career, the process itself was always in flux. The relationship between discipline and innovation was complex, but it was in the hands of a self-regulating scholarly community whose judgments were, for the most part, respected by administrators. That was what faculty governance was thought to be about. With the new accounting systems, it's outsiders to the scholarly enterprise who make the evaluations. This is true not only at universities, but at institutions such as the vaunted École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, where a whole new level of non-academic experts appointed by the state now call into question the decisions of faculty on the grounds not of substantive scholarship, but of market considerations, efficiency, economy, and the like. As for teaching, in the university we are losing, the faculty's ability to inspire young minds was what mattered the most. Redding's comments that, quote, Socrates knew that pedagogy took place under the sign of eros rather than of logos. By this, I think he meant that the transferential relationship of teacher and student could make the pursuit of knowledge a lifelong pleasure. How many of us, and not just the academics among us, credit some teacher with fundamentally changing our lives? The transferential relationship is an open-ended process. Educational time is incapable of closure. Reddings puts it this way, quote, pedagogy has a specific chronotope that is radically alien to the notion of accountable time upon which the excellence of capitalist bureaucratic management and bookkeeping depend, end of quote. In the end, it was not the transmission of measurable units of information that made an impact, but the interest and excitement a good teacher could incite. It's difficult to capture the old way of thinking about higher education without romanticizing it, without waxing nostalgic for the world we have lost. The brilliance of Redding's book is that he doesn't do that. The era of the university in the service of national cultural identity is over, he warns, and there's no going back. Instead, we have to find a way within the university, now managed as a capitalist bureaucracy, to salvage that which is most valuable, not only for ourselves, but for a democratic future we ought to want to preserve. After all, democracy depends not only on enlightened citizens, but on our ability to entertain uncertainty and doubt. Uncertainty and doubt are not only inspirations to the endless pursuit of knowledge, they also underlie and sustain democratic processes. Historically, democracy, as Claude Lefort and others have argued, introduced uncertainty and doubt in place of authoritarian structures of belief. Modern democracy, Lefort writes, invites us to replace the notion of a regime governed by laws of a legitimate power by the notion of a regime founded upon the legitimacy of a debate as to what is legitimate and what is illegitimate, a debate which is necessarily without any guarantor and without any end, end of quote. Education ought to prepare us for this kind of democratic citizenship, doubt and uncertainty, and how to deal with it. The stakes are really high. Redding suggests that there may be room to maneuver within the new capitalist university. For one thing, the structure is open to anything that may sell to diverse constituencies. But it's not particular knowledges, once excluded, that will address the challenge, he argues. Instead, it's an endorsement of a practice he calls thought, the referent for a network of obligation that for him is the definition of pedagogy. Like excellence, he says, thought has no intrinsic meaning, but it differs from excellence because it functions as a question. Excellence works because no one has to ask what it means. Thought demands that we ask what it means, end of quote. He continues, thought names a differend. It's a name over which arguments take place, arguments that occur in heterogeneous idioms. Differend, in the usage he's making of it, refers to Jean-François Lyotard and can be defined, who defines it as an unresolvable dispute, which nonetheless requires that the competing claims of different sides be respected in any negotiation. This is a continuation of the notion of debate about and doubt and uncertainty. And he continues, what is drawn out in education is not the hidden meaning of thought, not the true identity of students, not the true identity of the professor replicated in the students. Rather, what is drawn out is the aphoretic nature of the differend as to what the name of thought might mean. For Reddings and for us, the challenge is to keep the notion of thought alive and active in our work and teaching, to raise the question of accountability as something that, he says, exceeds the logic of accounting. But how is this to be done? On the theoretical level, I'd suggest more attention to the erotic aspects of the pursuit of knowledge, the unrecognized underside, the excessive dimension of scholarly life. By this I mean not actual sexual encounters, obviously, but the sublimated, phantasmatic aspects of the pedagogical process, excitement about the love of learning, what Professor von Oostum referred to as the seductive humanities. It seems to me that the excitement of education cannot ultimately be sustained without it. This, along with all the practical shortcomings, may contribute to the death of those MOOCs, those online automated courses, another aspect of the global marketing of academic instruction. But on the practical level, I find it hard to imagine how to realize Redding's invocation of thought as the subversive alternative to the neoliberal university of the 21st century. All I can think of is that those of us still in university positions must continue to practice it, boring from within against the grain, that we need to look to younger generations for their thoughts about how eros can remain a critical aspect of the educational experience. But that doesn't seem to me a practical or ultimate solution. It's at this point that my own retirement offers a way out. I don't have to think about it anymore. But I hope this conference and the audience in our discussions over the next few days can consider the question further, engaging in the deep thought the rector called for in his opening remarks. Thank you.
Neoliberal new public management is making the idea of the university obsolete because it is making the idea of professions and of professionalism obsolete. And whatever the university is, it is an institution of professional specialists. Therefore, the university cannot exist without specialized professions. I will argue that new public management does away with professionalism as such by constructing a cancer-like system of quantified controls. Before I will present my arguments for this thesis, I will first contextualize it by giving you two quotes and showing you a TV fragment. The first quote is from the major policy paper of the last government concerning the universities in the Netherlands, with the title Kwaliteit in Verscheidenheid, Quality in Plurality, that would be in English, I think. And I'm quoting this policy paper because actually present politics concerning the universities is the implementation of this policy paper. The kernel of this policy is to concentrate funding on a limited number of economic sectors, topsectorenbeleid. And then I quote one sentence out of this nota, out of this paper. No business as usual. The task of the universities, the task is to use science more effectively as fuel in the pipeline, knowledge, craft, cash. De opdracht is de wetenschap nog beter in te zetten als brandstof in de pijplijn, kennis, kunde, kassa. Nou, ik zou het een Joep van het Hek tekst, maar het belangrijkste beleidsdocument van de Nederlandse regering. Sorry, I was saying this sounded like a text of a comic, but nevertheless it was the Dutch Ministry of Education. My second quote is taken from the opening lines of an article published last year by the sociologist Roger Burrows, and the article is called Living with the H Index. It was published in a sociological review. It goes like this, and I quote, "Something has changed in the academy. Many academics are exhausted, stressed, overloaded, suffering from insomnia, feeling anxious, hurt, guilt, and out of placeness. One can observe it all around. A deep, affective, somatic crisis threatens to overwhelm us. We know this, yet somehow we feel unable to reassert ourselves. In our brave new world, it seems that a single final criterion of value is recognized, a quantitative economic criterion. All else is no more than a means, and there is a single method for ensuring that this criterion is satisfied, quantified control." End of quote. Now let me shortly illustrate my thesis by showing you a TV fragment, which I took from The Wire. I was informed that many young people would be present and maybe they know the series. Maybe the oldies, maybe my generation too. Well, The Wire is an American television series. It's a crime drama, and it's set and produced in and around the police department of Baltimore, Maryland. This city has a huge drugs problems, like many cities, and therefore also a huge problem with criminality. Politicians want to do something about it. Of course, the university is not as yet the same as the police department, but nevertheless, there are extremely illuminating similarities of how quantified control is affecting the work floor and professionalism in both institutions, I think. The Wire is, among other things, famous for its realism and for its realistic use of the English language. In this fragment, taken from the episode With All Due Respect, you will be witnessing a meeting of the district commanders of Baltimore with their two bosses. In this meeting, the district commanders are held accountable, the word has been used before, by their bosses for the crime rates in their districts and for the fact that these crime rates differ from the policy aims of Baltimore's mayor, who wants to be re-elected. And I'm showing you this scene because district commanders who still have their boots on the ground can be seen as representing the professionals, in my view, and the crime statistics thrown in their faces as a form of quantified control. In the opening scene, preceding the meeting, you'll see two district commanders shortly before they will enter this meeting. The black guy is a veteran commander of Western Baltimore, Howard Colvin, who is about to retire.
Gotta hit the head.
Can't take this shit, buddy.
Hey, you'll pass. You're just riding you now. Next week is somebody new. You can't take away your EOD, Marvin. The worst they can do is bust you back to lieutenant.
I don't even want to think about the worst these motherfuckers can do. You don't either.
You're still not connecting the dots, Marvin. Have a look.
Huffman and Holbrook, sir.
Very good. But you had a body drop there last week, and this is what the fuck it looked like yesterday. Bond and Preston, for the record. Ashland and Wolf. Chase and Durham.
Sir, I deployed my resources per your instructions. We've beefed up foot patrols. We have our plainclothes squads on 12-hour shifts.
And the corners stay full.
They move, sir. Every day. They're going to sell their drugs somewhere.
Major Taylor, I look at your numbers, I see the intel reports, the photos. It all tells me that you lack a fucking clue.
If you'll permit me. Is your deputy major present?
Yes, sir.
You now command the Eastern District. Major Taylor, you are relieved. Take the podium. Anyone else having trouble with the writing on the wall? Dismissed.
The Major no doubt has some explanation, some excuse, if you will, for a weekly felony tabulation that's going in the opposite direction from the other 8 districts.
I have none, sir.
You are content with this?
No, Deputy. I'm unhappy. I wish we were making more of an impact. But doing what we're doing, it's clear that's not the case.
Major Colvin, I'm under the impression crime is down in the Western. Perhaps you misfigured your felony stats this week.
No, sir. You're very accurate. Sometimes the gods are uncooperative.
Uncooperative? This is a cooperative effort, a cooperative department. Why, in the Eastern District, Lieutenant Daniels exemplified this new spirit just the other day. Because of that, we got 2 fresh homicides in the black and a lot less bodies on the streets than could have been had that drug war been allowed to drag on.
Taken the hit in public for
This is what we're talking about.
You're kidding
Sacrifice
me. Where's
for
the
the greater
fucking
good.
loyalty, I ask you?
But in the Western, what do I get from a veteran commander? You're just having a laugh, aren't you, Bunny? You got the real stats and projections somewhere else. Someone's just outside the door with them, right? A stripper, maybe. That would be nice. She comes in, flashes a little tit, gives us a whiff of that muff, and delivers my fucking stat sheets with the reduction that matches just what we promised the mayor. That would be beautiful. That would be creme fucking brulee. But what I got instead is some half-assed, I wish we were doing better platitude that's meant to fool maybe a 6-year-old girl into thinking you're doing your job. Well, she's left the room, Major Colvin. She's out there right now asking the stripper if she can have her job when she grows up because she sure as shit doesn't want yours. You know why? Because there isn't going to be a goddamn Western District in 20 years if this shit keeps up.
I don't care how many years you have on this job. If the felony rate doesn't fall, you most certainly will. The gods are fucking you. You find a way to fuck them back. It's Baltimore, gentlemen. The gods will not save you.
Okay, that was The Wire, and I'm sorry for the language used, of course, and it's a male world, but nevertheless. Actually, it is seen my thesis that new public management is fundamentally at odds with professionalism is shown. But maybe you want to hear a couple of arguments too, and I will try to provide them. The argument behind my thesis is simple. It's the argument that professions need professional autonomy in order to function properly. And quantified control makes the proper functioning of professions impossible. This holds both for the police officers you have been watching and for the academic professions making up the university. In short, quantified control is making the proper functioning of the university impossible, just as it is making the proper functioning of police departments impossible. In order to explain this, I must elaborate a bit on the sociological characteristics of professions and on the differences between professions on the one side and laborers and employees on the other. Well, the crucial distinction in case is that professions determine their own standards, their own criteria of evaluation of what counts as specific requirements and as the quality of their professional performances. Therefore, all professions determine their own professional hierarchy, local, national, and global. This hierarchy is ultimately based upon the reputation of individual professions. His or her reputation is again based upon the assessment by the professional community of the contributions of the individual scholar to his or her professional body of knowledge. Moreover, professions determine their own procedures of inclusion and exclusion. Because professions determine their own standards, hierarchies, and rules of inclusion and exclusions, professions are basically self-governing institutions. And this may sound romantic to some of you, but nevertheless, I think that's the core. Now, how does this idea of professionalism connect to neoliberalism and to new public management? My basic argument is that neoliberal new public management has been and still is undermining professions and professionalism as such at an alarming speed. It did and does so by replacing the self-governance of professionals by quantified systems of control, like the crime statistics in the wire, or, and this brings us closer to home, the educational statistics in the so-called performance agreements that the Dutch universities are making with the government, the prestatieafspraken. The crucial fact here is that control systems are not set and run by professionals, but by politicians and managers. The circumstance that many managers and politicians are former professionals is not relevant here. What is relevant is that they no longer behave like professionals because they don't stick to the quality standards of their profession. Professionals know and acknowledge that the gods may be uncooperative, as the district commander of Western Baltimore District formulated so beautifully. Managers and politicians, to the contrary, presuppose that the gods can be forced to cooperate and that they obey their policy plans and statistics. Let me illustrate my last statement about forcing the gods to policy plans and statistics by the example of the University of Utrecht. But I could have taken any other university, but we happen to be here today. Just like the other Dutch universities, the University of Utrecht in 2012 has signed performance agreements with the Dutch government concerning the improvement of the quality of education and research. And this is the implementation of this policy paper I was referring to before. I'll restrict myself to education and not go into research. What did the University of Utrecht promise? Well, in order to increase the quality of education, the University of Utrecht has promised to reduce the dropout rate of students systematically. Utrecht promised the government to reduce the dropout rate after the first year from 20% in 2006 to 15% in 2016, so a reduction of 5%. The dropping out of students at university thus can be meaningfully be compared to the dropping of dead bodies in the police districts of Baltimore. In both cases, policymakers regard the reduction of the rate as a crucial indicator of the improvement of quality. In both cases, the professionals that don't produce the right improvements are facing a problem. Utrecht has also promised to deliver the government more excellent students. So it will raise the percentage of students who are taking honors courses from 5% in 2006 to 12% in 2016. Again, we see a promise of excellence on delivery. And again, those professionals that will not deliver will be facing similar problems as the district commander of Western Baltimore was facing in the wire. As I said before, Utrecht is by no means the only institution promising the Dutch government what it wants. That is, more quality in education and research for less money. All do. Fontijs Hogescholen, a conglomerate of professional schools, has promised the Dutch government to raise their success rate with students to 95% after 4 years. So 95% of their students go home with a diploma after. This is a promise. The professionals who don't deliver will be facing problems. So much for the examples, the educational examples of quantified systems of control for the moment. These performance agreements only represent a top layer of these control systems. There are all kinds of other quantified control systems which work at the individual level, the department level, etc. I will not go into that. Citation index is one of them, transparent workload models, university league tables. You can fill it in yourself. What all these quantified systems of control have in common is that they are external to the university, to the professionals that are being judged, and that they basically replace the idea of professional quality by measurable quantity. They basically exchange professionalism for metrification. And this metrification is predominantly based on so-called output indicators, output of research, output of teaching, etc. And new public management claims that metrification confers transparency, but also democratic accountability in places where we only had seen self-serving, closed, inward-looking professions. That's the ideology surrounding all this quality control. So in the last instance, new public management actually has transferred the power of the professions to determine their own criteria of evaluations to a very small number of mainly Anglo-Saxon corporations that produce the data for university rankings. And I will not name them, but you can find them in all the literature. The claim of this metrification is, of course, objectification, and that you replace all these self-serving professionals by something that is objective. Well, if you have a look at, for instance, university league tables, 2 years ago, University of Utrecht moved somewhere between place number 50 in the university rankings and world rankings and place number 150. So you can have a range of 100 places in a ranking. So much for the objectivity of these rankings. Therefore, and now I'm coming to a close, the best thing university management can do is to establish their own university ranking, as Leiden University understood some years ago. In that case, you can fix your own mix of output indicators and fix your own ranking, more or less. We could call this rank fixing, a term inspired by the recent discovery of match fixing in sports. The only problem university managers have to tackle next is to get their own ranking system accepted by other universities that have gone down the same road. For good neoliberal new public managers, that, however, is no problem, because if the gods are not cooperative, they just make them cooperate. Thank you.
I'm going to set up the problem I want to discuss today by discussing first neoliberalism, second human capital and the humanities, third the liberal arts, and finally democracy. And I'll do this in 20 minutes. So each discussion is quite minimalist and quite unsubtle, and it's scaffolding for what hopefully could be a more delicate argument, but I won't be delicate today. Neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is, as most of us know, many things. Crucially, I want to treat it today as a governing rationality that disseminates market values and market metrics to every sphere of life and construes the human itself exclusively as homo economicus. It doesn't merely privatize, that is, turn over to the market for individual production and consumption what was formerly publicly supported and valued. Rather, importantly, neoliberalism as a governing rationality, a way of thinking, a normative form of reason that operates and seeps into every sphere of life. It formulates everything, everywhere, in terms of capital investment, capital appreciation, including and especially human beings themselves. And importantly, I'm not using capital here as a strictly monetary or monetized figure. The point, rather, is that all activities, all endeavors, are framed as markets, and that's, of course, something that resume builders among the 10-year-old set know as well as universities that govern their, or game their ranking systems. Now, there are lots of ramifications of this process, but I want to name here especially these 4 related effects. First, it's increasingly difficult to speak of or secure public goods of any kind. The market metrics contouring every dimension of human conduct and institutions make it daily more difficult to explain why universities, libraries, transportation and road systems, parks, natural reserves, even infrastructure, city services, and elementary schools are or should be publicly accessible and publicly provisioned. And I realize I'm speaking from a distinctly Anglo-American perspective, but I have no confidence that that perspective will be contained or caged over the coming years. The question then today is, why should the public fund and administer any of these things? Why should everyone have access to them? Why shouldn't their cost be charged only to those who want or use them? It's already a symptom of the vanishing value of public things and a lexicon for those things that these kinds of questions are today converted generally to a very different question, namely, what is the role for state versus private provision of goods and services? And in that conversion, the state is not identified with the public, but only as an alternate market actor. Individuals, meanwhile, are cast not as members of a democratic public who might support and share certain common goods and spaces and experiences, but as consumers, as entrepreneurs, as self-investors, or as taxpayers. Moreover, democracy itself has been radically transformed by a disseminating neoliberal rationality to every sphere, including politics and law. In this transformation, political meanings of equality, of autonomy, and of freedom are increasingly giving way to economic valences of these terms. The meaning of popular sovereignty is growing incoherent as governance through expertise, through market metrics, and through best practices replaces justice-framed contestations over who we are, who we should be, what we should become, what we should do or not do as a people. Moreover, subjects, including citizen subjects, are also configured by the market metrics of our time, increasingly rendered as self-investing bits of human capital. Now, importantly, human capital is not, as was homo economicus of yore, driven by its interests. Nor is it the classical liberal subject described by John Stuart Mill as free to make its own life in its own way. Rather, human capital is enjoined to self-invest in ways that contribute to its appreciation, or at least prevent its depreciation. And that, of course, includes calculating risks, titrating inputs such as education, predicting and adjusting to changing markets, and organizing all of its activities, its dating and mating and leisure practices, in value-maximizing ways. Human capital is distinctly not concerned with acquiring the knowledge and the experience needed for intelligent democratic citizenship. Knowledge, too, is mainly valued for its contribution to capital enhancement. This doesn't reduce to a desire only for technical knowledges and skills. As we know, many professions today, from law to software design, from engineering to medicine, profess to value and indeed require analytic capacities, communication skills, even close reading abilities. Rather, the point is that neoliberalization of every sphere and of the human itself means that knowledge is not sought for purposes apart from capital enhancement, whether that capital is human, corporate, or financial. It's not sought for developing the capacities of citizens, for sustaining culture, for knowing the world, for envisioning and crafting different ways of life in common. It's rather sought for what has increasingly come to be called positive ROI, return on investment, one of the leading metrics the Obama administration now proposes to use in rating colleges. So that's the neoliberalism section. I now want to talk about human capital and the humanities. Standard defenses of the humanities today tend to be of two sorts, which I think are really two sides of the same neoliberal coin. Either they are said to build the analytic or ethical thinkers sought by the professions, or they are said to build the soul and thus secure a more gratifying life for an individual. And I've never actually been convinced of that equation, that the humanities, in building the soul, make us more gratified human beings. So I've never been convinced that that particular defense goes anywhere. But so these are the two approaches that humanists offer for the most part. Either we're contributing analytic and ethical thought that the professions need, or we're building human souls and making more gratifying lives. Both defenses comport with the idea of self-investment and self-appreciation. Both comport with a reduction of us to human capital and societies, to collections of human capitals. Put another way, in these defenses, the humanities are not conceived as opening out onto the world, as representing, theorizing, and interpreting the world, or as building the world. They're not conceived as holding us together or renewing us as a people. They're not conceived as alerting us to dangers or providing frames and figures and theories and allegories for altering our practices or collective trajectories. Above all, they are not conceived as educating human beings in the histories and the various literacies required for democratic citizenship. Rather, they're conceived as something for individuals to imbibe like chocolate, or practice like yoga, or utilize like engineering. They're presumed to inhabit a land apart from the material world, the practical world, the world of power, profit, and achievement, although bits of the skills one learns in studying them are regarded as that which may be broken off and honed as instruments for that world. This is a measure, I think, of how far neoliberalization has already gone. Even its critics cannot see the ways in which we have lost a recognition of the world as literally held together by literatures, by images, by religions, histories, myths, ideas, forms of reason, grammars, figures, languages. Instead, the world is held together by technologies and capital flows. That presumption, of course, is at risk of becoming true, at which point humanity would have entered its darkest chapter ever. We would be the specks of human capital and nothing else of the contemporary neoliberal theoretical imaginary. The liberal arts. In the remainder of this talk, I'm going to speak about the liberal arts, not just the humanities, because for reasons which will become apparent, I actually believe it's a theoretical and tactical mistake to hive off defenses of the humanities from defenses of a broad liberal arts education for an educated citizenry. Certainly, we have to explain specifically what the humanities bring to that education, to citizen education, but we need to do it, I think, in alliance with the other elements of the liberal arts. Rooted in liberis, the Latin word for freedom, this term, the liberal arts, has since classical antiquity denoted the education appropriate to free men. It was and has long been conceived as the knowledge necessary to enact freedom, to engage and contribute to rather than be overwhelmed by the natural and human powers of the world. Hence, the original liberal arts, reserved for the very elite few, were grammar, dialectic, rhetoric, geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music. Later, history, theology, and art would be added along with the natural sciences. Extending a liberal arts education from the elite to the many in the last century, especially but not only in the American public university system, was nothing short of a radical democratic event, one in which, briefly, all were imagined eligible for a life of freedom, understood as both individual sovereignty and participation in collective or popular sovereignty, democratic self-rule. Democracy. It's a commonplace that today the powers coursing through and organizing the world are becoming ever more complex and ever more integrated. This means, however, that democracy, to have any substance at all, as the political form promising that human beings rule themselves, requires ever more educated human beings. One cannot participate in ruling, even if that means only thoughtfully choosing representatives or voting on referenda, without knowing the powers and the problems one is engaging. A key premise of public secondary and higher education in the West over the past several centuries has been that a citizenry capable of governing itself has to be educated for that activity. At minimum, a democratic people need to understand the historical conditions of their present, the basic workings of economics and politics, and the powers organizing social and psychic relations. They need enough knowledge about histories and peoples other than themselves to have humility. They need enough skill in imagining the lives and viewpoints other than their own to be able to think about and care for the common. They require enough education in science to be able to parse foolish from sound claims, just as they require enough critical literary and rhetorical skills to be discerning about what they read, hear, and watch about a range of cultural, political, ecological, and economic predicaments and developments. Put another way, democracy doesn't demand universal political participation based on high levels of expert knowledge, but it cannot survive the people's wholesale ignorance of the forces shaping our lives, challenging our present, limiting our future. A citizenry left to its own manipulated interests and passions, especially in an era of unprecedentedly complex powers, inevitably comes to be governed by what Tocqueville termed the gentle despotism of those powers, even as we continue to travel under the sign of democracy and imagine ourselves to be free. Moreover, as neoliberal rationality reduces the meaning of freedom and autonomy to unimpeded market behavior and reduces the meaning of citizenship to mere enfranchisement, this evisceration of robust norms of democracy is accompanied by unprecedented challenges to democratization. These challenges include complex forms and novel concentrations of economic and political power, sophisticated marketing and theatricality in politics, corporately owned media, and a historically unparalleled glut of information and opinion, which all produce an illusion of knowledge. The dramatic thinning of key democratic values, coupled with the intensification of non-democratic forces and conditions, threatens us today with the replacement of self-rule with a condition in which people are mostly pawns rather than governors of every kind of modern power. And at that point, we have demotic power, people power, that is technically legitimate, but dangerous in its ignorance and manipulability. This is precisely the demos feared historically, not only by overt anti-democrats like Plato, Aristotle, or Nietzsche, but by those ostensibly endorsing democracy, like Tocqueville or Mill. So the central paradox I want to place before us today is this. If the liberal arts are essential to well-functioning democracy, to reasoned, thoughtful, informed deliberations by citizens, it is also the case that democracy can vote them out, defund them, degrade them, or abandon them. And that is precisely what neoliberalized democracy is doing. Spurred by neoliberal diminution of everything that does not convert or contribute to capital, the public has disinvested in higher education generally, withdrawing support for it as a public good and increasingly skeptical of it as a private one. A neoliberalized public has broadly turned against liberal arts education and even the value of college, favoring instead job and professional training. Meanwhile, professional schools are also shrinking their curriculums and time to degree. American law schools, for example, are preparing to compress 3-year curriculums into 2, and it is obvious enough what will be excised or rendered optional. History, not torts. Comparative constitutions, not corporate tax law. There is, of course, also a vicious cycle here. As privatization drives up the cost of a university education, debt financing amidst protracted recession and job shortages intensify doubts about the very value of higher education that is not job training. Put another way, our problem today is that a liberal arts education available to the many is essential to any modern democracy we could value, but is not indigenous to it. Moreover, the less educated the public is, the less perspicacity it can bring to what it might need to retain or renew democracy. Indeed, the less a public can even value or desire democracy. One crucial effect of neoliberal rationality, I've suggested, is to reduce that desire, as well as its discursive intelligibility when it does appear. So we have a variation on Rousseau's democratic paradox, in which he argued, to make good laws, a people must antecedently be what only good laws can make them into. The variation today I'm suggesting is to preserve the kind of education that nourishes democratic culture and enables democratic rule, we have to have the knowledge and wisdom that only a liberal arts education can provide. Let me conclude. Only non-democracy can save democratic education. The diminishment of education for democracy, and more generally of the liberal arts as a public good, is not obvious like a melting ice cap, or Kenyan elephants being slaughtered for their tusks, or even like local shops being shuttered by big box stores. It's not like the sprawling slums and shanty towns harboring the cast-off billions of the global economy, or like the scandalous unemployment and rising hunger rates in Southern Europe. It doesn't show on surfaces. It's not even a story easily told. But perhaps some of these other phenomena carry a clue about what is to be done here. Democracy in its current state, configured as it is by neoliberal rationality, cannot be counted on to save the value of liberal arts education for a democratic citizenry. Instead, I want to suggest we need guardians, we need stewards, we need trustees of educated democracy and democratic education, just as we have stewards of the wilderness, of the arts, of endangered species and cultures. How would this go? Such guardians or trustees of educated democracy, whether taking shape as high councils in governments or in universities or both, would not be representative committees, stakeholder groups, or policymakers. Members would not be democratically elected, nor on the other hand could they be appointed according to their corporate or financial status, as most, if not all, trustees and regents are today. Rather, they would be selected for their established concern with an educated citizenry and hover near the center of power without precisely being in power where they would be available to corruption and interest. They would, as Plato had it, be those who least desire to rule. The trustees of educated democracy would do their work by considering every significant proposed development or change to higher education policy and universities through the prism of its effect on educated democracy. Such changes might include tuition increases, loan programs, reorganized curriculums or degrees, major partnerships with certain corporate donors, radical budget reallocations, new assessment instruments, contracts with MOOCs, and more. Anything could be brought before the trustees by anyone, but only one question would guide their analysis and deliberations. Does this proposed policy, or divestment, or restructuring, or new set of relationships tend toward the enhancement or the diminution of the mission of universities to educate citizens for democracy? Of course, that's not the only important question to ask of proposed changes in state education policy or about university priorities. But it's critical enough that the answer ought to have a certain supervenience. Most importantly, this question, currently absent from almost all debates and developments concerning the future of higher education, might by this means at least come back into public discourse. Of course, there'll be lots of practical and political objections to such a proposal, starting with how such guardians would be chosen and the violation of liberal democracy that such a council represents. And to this I would only repeat, democracy is now itself so trammeled by market meanings and practices that it is incapable of preserving an educated populace, just as it's incapable of preserving the arts or guiding us toward a sustainable planet. Indeed, that trammeling is part of what brought us to this pass, as the demos itself now ratifies practices and conditions by which it is disintegrated as a demos. So we cannot leave the public good to democracy thinned to market desires and conduct. We need, rather, a conservation agency, one that would parallel environmental impact reports with educated democracy impact reports. Or to switch the metaphor a little, one that understands educated democracy as severely endangered and which, once extinguished, may be gone forever. As to other objections, they're so numerous that this proposal will probably never get to the runway. Democrats, anarchists, and autocrats would all oppose it, as would free marketeers, academic freedom purists, and rational maximizers in every field. And then there are the vested interests and powers. Parliaments and senates would hate such abridgment of their powers, and within the university, this kind of body would be opposed by faculty senates, administrations, and regents, by faculty and students who care mainly about branding and market positioning, and alas, opposed by almost all the unions. While generating this unholy alliance of opponents may perversely underscore the importance of such bodies, it probably also dooms them to the status of a provocative idea offered in an academic lecture hall one autumn morning. But at this very late point in the game, it may be our only hope.
I think Henk in the middle, and then over here.
I'll try to formulate the question. So I agree on the idea that the capitalization of human relations is one of the things that we have to prevent, but it's quite widespread. The social return on investment, like, is not only the human capital, but with Putnam, it's social capital. With Florida, it's the cultural capital, so creativity is also capitalized in that way. So how can we counter this perverse development? That's the idea. So a few of, well, all of you have mentioned at least once or twice the idea of skill. Skill as a ability, but also skill as a practice. So we are at a university where I think the old guild system is intact completely. We are taking exams on bachelors and on masters, which was in the old days at least. Well, Van Oostrom can illustrate this, I think, but that was the old system, master and bachelor. So on the educational level, there is a system within the university that still is intact. The question is, does craftsmanship, or is craftsmanship an anchor point to counter the idea of decapitalization? I'm referring, of course, to Sennett or Arendt, in a way, as far as Sennett is criticizing Arendt. But so, is craftsmanship a counterpoint to this capitalization of relations? And is liberal arts, first and for all, focused on skills and not on knowledge?
I'll take a few more.
Can you hold it? Yes. Yeah. I feel very addressed by you three, the lectures. I feel very alarmed. In a way, I feel like throwing up, like in the movie, and I have a headache.
Please
I've
don't.
developed a headache. So I feel very addressed, but the question is, one of the questions is, what do I miss? And I feel I miss the addressee in your lectures. And I think I am one of the addressees, but I'm not working in academics. I'm working as an academic outside academics, and I might be one of the crazy trends that alignment needs to be developed with. So that's my...
Okay, a few more at the back there, two more. I'll take this side of the room, then we can move in the center.
My name is Trace Lamers, and I'm a researcher at Campus Orion. My question is, I like the wire very much, and I know the point you want to make. My question is, how can the university escape from the entangles of the control system given from the new management view? How can they do that?
Just there, and then I'll take the next sections of the room in a minute. I think we take an answer, and I shall return to you. Yes.
My name is Floris Solveld. I'm a PhD student at Radboud University Nijmegen. My question is to all three of you. I'm curious about the monster you're addressing, neoliberalism. It's very obvious that the kind of logic you describe exists. But I mean, we never quite know where the lair of the monster is. I mean, there are very few people, apart from Hayek and a few of his followers, who describe themselves explicitly as neoliberals. So in a sense, it had become a term of abuse. To what extent is neoliberalism, say, some sort of conspiracy, or rather an ideology, or rather some sort of invisible hand working somewhere? To what extent is it identifiable with very distinct representatives? To what extent is it even a myth? Or more squarely put, who should we put under guillotine?
I will turn this over to the panel at this moment. I will ask the rest of you to please show your hands so I can take registration. Would you like to self-organize? Who wants to go first? Let's not get into too much wire. We'll lose concentration.
I will just try to react to a couple of questions, not all of them. The first is yours, Oosterlings, I think. And if I understand you correctly, you are arguing that basically at the educational level, the structures are still intact. I would doubt that. I would say that the quantified control in especially the pressure put on faculty to conform to output measures is basically has basically already transformed educational practices.
Everything through the chair, no bilaterals, please. You can do that over lunch.
No. So I think the problem is already internal in our practices, and as far as universities are functioning and as teaching is functioning, it is because we still see ourselves as professionals, and we are resisting, let's say, the reduction of our practices to numbers. But that's a sliding scale, and I think the problem in its purest form is faced by the younger generations, the people who want to enter the profession. I mean, there's a basic distinction between the position of tenured professors and the people without tenure, and tenure is dying out. I mean, that's also neoliberal policy. Maybe we can address that another time. Well, maybe you should take over.
Joan and then Wendy.
I guess I want to start with your question about who the addressee is. I think the addressee is what Wendy might call the general democratic public. I mean, I don't think this is a conversation meant entirely for those of us in the university, but a question about a larger set of practices that are transforming the university and its notion of what its educational mission is. And I'm sorry that you have a headache, but it's a very disturbing, we are at a very, I think we all, the three of us feel, we're at a very disturbing moment in terms of the conception of what education means, what our place in the education establishment is. Although our places may be secure because of our age and our position, what we look ahead to is not comforting and not encouraging. And I think Wendy put it most forcefully, not encouraging not only about how we teach and what we teach, but what it means for any notion of democratic citizenship that lies ahead. One of the things that Bill Rennings argues in his book, The University in Ruins, is that the detachment of education from the mission of national consolidation, national literatures, national histories, national political systems, is partly sets off this set of developments. And one of the things I think we need to think is what the relationship of the fields in the humanities we teach, literatures, histories, are, how you rethink those fields in the face of the loss of national sovereignty. It's no longer a national history that grounds this education, but some other kind of history. So it calls for a large set of reconsiderations that I think conferences like this have to begin the conversations with. Wendy's attempt to argue for these trustees, these fabulous trustees who will take care of us in some way, or preserve the mission or hold back the dark, I think is meant as an attempt to think the problem beyond simple solutions of kind of finding our way. I read, there were a couple of pieces in this online journal called Inside Higher Education in the United States, in which people say, well, the form of assessment that's taking place is bad, but here's how we can address assessment and get away with it. And those kinds of short-term remedies seem to me not to be addressing the problem in the critical way that we need to do it.
Wendy?
I think that probably answers all of these. I don't think, just a parenthesis, that neoliberalism is an ideology in the sense of an ideology as kind of hiding itself behind certain I think it's right out there. I don't think we're addressing an ideological problem anymore that has to be uncovered, because its premises, its rhetoric, its conceptualization is right out there for us to see, the market, and in the applications that Wendy described.
Private one here. So I'll just address two of the questions, and I'll start where Joan just left off. Who should be put on the guillotine for neoliberalism, or where is its lair? They're both beautiful questions, but I do think both misapprehend how a governing rationality works. And for me, Weber and Foucault have been most useful here. because Weber gives us the idea of rationality as not just an ideology or a form of reason, but that which actually has the power to govern and remake the world in its own image, which is what Joan, I think, was just talking about. And then Foucault takes that and really enriches the notion quite substantially to understand governing rationalities as forms of normative reason that do bring about the world in the image of those forms of reason, and as those norms circulate, make true what a Marxist might understand as but an ideology. That doesn't mean that neoliberalism is smooth and without internal contradictions and bits of madness, and I mean, those are all interesting and fun to talk about late at night when one needs that gallows humor, but I think it's not a conspiracy. I don't think it has a lair. I don't think we can put any particular heads on the guillotine, because I think what we're dealing with is forms of governance that have, it doesn't take long to sort of look and see that they've seeped into every aspect of life, often by very good, well-intentioned people, including lefties. And increasingly I hear, for example, the language of governance and best practices and the kinds of metrics that we've been discussing coming out of the mouths of those who want them for our side. And I think that's a mistake, but I think it's important to see the way that a governing rationality comes to operate deep within, remake subjectivities, reorient all of us toward our every aspect of our lives. Enough on that. This isn't a conference on neoliberalism, but I think it's an important question to sort of think about what it is as a modality of governance of the subject, of institutions, and of every domain of life. It leads me, though, to want to say something about your question about craftsmanship and capitalization of relations. I think maybe I disagree a little bit with you. I think that, on the one hand, the metrics and the forms of rationality that are everywhere governing the university are surely transforming it. And they're transforming the meaning of knowledge and the organization of knowledge. Knowledge follows the money in a different way than it ever has before. It's less protected, not just at the level of curiosity and freedom, but even at the level of what's in today may be out tomorrow, and no longer saleable and no longer have a place even in an academic market, let alone a wider market. But I do think that if part of your question is aiming at whether critical academics have had an interest in trying to remake and reorganize the way we think about what good development of minds and training entails, I think the answer is no. I think most critical academics are hanging on desperately to departments, to programs, to degrees, to tenure, to a whole lot of things that I'm not suggesting we just give up and throw away, but I don't think enough rethinking is happening to consider what you called craftsmanship, or what might also be called a question of 21st century education that would not simply be technical and market-oriented, and would not, on the other hand, simply hew to a classical model of learning for its own sake, or the best and the brightest, or knowledge preserved, or what we owe the past, but would really think hard about what the best institutional as well as substantive organization of learning is and should be. And I think we've mostly been in a very defensive mode. I know that's not quite what your question is, but I'm not sure craftsmanship will be the right counter, but I do think there is something to be said for those critical of the neoliberalization of the university and the disappearance of the liberal arts with that neoliberalization. For those of us who take that stance, I think we ought to be coming up with ways to organize our teaching and our research that are defensible, not necessarily in neoliberal language, but in language that is at least intelligible today in a way that the classic halls of academia are not. I just don't think we'll survive by hanging on to what we've had. I think the very fact that humanists are so poor, for the most part, at defending the humanities as something other than ethics or analytic thinking or close reading or just really good for the soul because how could you give up Shakespeare? You know, all that's true, but that's not going to keep four-year programs, let alone substantial graduate programs in the humanities going. So I think we have some pretty big rethinking to do.
Thank you.
I thought you did. Yeah, yeah.
But that's
that's
the question for after lunch. I have 4 people registered, and I'm closing registration now. Let's start. Let's start from Joanna Burke. We go in a circle. We're coming to you. 4 people. There's no more registration. Joanna, Angeliki, over here and over here.
Hi, thanks. I enjoyed all 3, and I'll be very, very quick because I want to really ask a question to Wendy because I really enjoyed, and I like this idea of this conservation agency kind of modeled on agencies for protecting animals, the extinction of certain animals, and I think that's really ironic and interesting in the context of what it means to be human. I also thought you spoke very forcibly and convincingly about the problematics of democracy. So I have a really very, very simple, small question, and that is, what is the future for democracy? And with a democracy.
Just a little one. Let's go. We're clustering all the questions. Angeliki is next, and then we're crossing over here.
Hi, thanks for your lectures. My name is Angeliki, and I come from Greece. I'm a PhD student here. The problem, as you say, it is the budget cut right now in Greece for the universities. For me, I'm worried about the situation in Greece. Yesterday, a leftist was killed by Golden Dawn, by the fascist party. Right now in Greece, we have from Monday huge strikes, and this happened yesterday. I don't know what will happen in Greece, but the huge problem that we have to face right now is the fascist party in Greece. I want to bring this experience, my experience, on the table because after the attempt to come into neoliberalism in Greece, the fascist party entered the Greek parliament and now has reached 15% in Europe. And I want to bring this experience to you all. Thank you.
Let's go across over here, and then we end with... Can you raise your hand? Yeah. The microphone, it would have been quicker at the back, but... Logistics.
My name is Emanuele Santos. I'm a PhD candidate here at the University of Utrecht. The program I was affiliated with has recently been closed, together with some other ones. But that's not really the reason why I'm addressing you, for you to pity me or anything. No. I really liked pretty much the 3 presentations that were being put forward now. And I thought that they were going into a little crescendo from the everyday practice of the university nowadays, how it has become, into a more larger picture. And I would like to ask you, having these 2 things in mind, a bit more the university within the institution and the role of the institution in the public sphere. I would like to ask you, how do you think that the university can actually intervene in building an educated democracy when many battles are already lost in the very local level of the institution itself? The fact is that courses are being closed, access is being made difficult, funding is being cut, and the universities are implementing those changes. My question to you is, what would you propose as roads of action, not solutions, but routes of action to those that are currently within the institution? Thank you.
Last one, Professor Waldijk over here. So you get questions like future of democracy, role of university, and you're going to get about 3 minutes to answer them. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. Last question for the morning.
I'm Bertke Waldijk, and I'm proud to say that I have a job in this university at the School for Liberal Arts, and that I wanted to thank Wendy for this call to arms for the liberal arts, and especially your argument not to leave it to a defense of the humanities. because as you argued, this turns into too defensive of either we are enjoying beauty and we know what is right, what is not sustainable, but especially that in a liberal arts program we can do much more about this balancing act and this comparing of different certainties that exist, and combined with the role for university to train students, and Joan, thank you for bringing that up, and to keep up uncertainty and doubt as the core of what education is about. Thank you, and I think liberal arts is a great call to, a Greenpeace for the liberal arts.
So more of a comment than a question. In which order shall we proceed? Joan, you want to start? Should we just go across?
I don't know the answers to any of these questions. I don't think any of us do. And the future of democracy is imperiled. That's the answer. The example from Greece is, and from many of the other countries in Europe where right-wing parties are coming to say nothing of the American Congress right now. And this reflects, I think, Wendy's point about the kind of education people are getting to be able to think critically about their own futures, about what life together means, about politics in general. These things are the fruits of an educational systems well in decline for the reasons that we've talked about. What's to be done at the local level? Again, it seems to me there are local forms of protest that can be engaged in, demands that programs continue that are about to be abolished, demands that, but very specific to local developments that are being done. Whether those are going to reverse these trends or not, it's very hard to say. It seems to me one wants to throw obstacles in the way of these transformations, resist them if one can, and hope that at least not only will things slow down, but that something will emerge. Some of the kinds of trustees that Wendy is talking about will emerge even among wealthy philanthropists in places we're not anticipating or expecting, whose values will call into question some of these developments. That's all I can come up with. And I imagine that the point of this conference and of our conversations is to push for answers in better ways than we can formulate them at this moment.
I hope so too, and to contribute to that analysis. Actually, I think the most important thing to do for us academics is actually to start to analyze where the problems for the humanities have come from. And this morning there were a couple of suggestions that the problems with getting funding, state funding, would somehow hang together with information lack on the side of the politics. I don't believe this story, I must say. I don't believe that the problems, the what good is are the humanities for, that question has somehow to do with information. This discussion about what the humanities are good for and what university is good for is as old as, well, it at least goes back to the 19th century. There's this beautiful book by Frank Donoghue called The Last Professors, which especially addresses this question, and he traces this whole discussion about should humanities produce useful knowledge or should they produce Bildung. He traces them back to the 19th century. So this discussion has been with us, but the fact and our problem is that we are facing this question in a more urgent way than ever before today, and everything has to do, I think, with the political situation. Simply since the financial crisis has come to us, the university is more or less represented as a kind of luxury item, and especially the humanities are seen as are presented as a luxury item. What can we do about it? I think at least the tenured colleagues among us could show some more backbone. I mean, I think a lot of the problems in the universities go back to the fact that academics, faculty members tend to operate in a strategic way. Whatever comes from administration, we will try to find some way to handle it and to go on with our business as usual. And I think this strategy is not really working. And I don't ask the people without tenure and the younger ones to start a revolt, although it's interesting to see that they are most active in protest movements. In Belgium at present there's a movement going on basically questioning all these output criteria. And I think this is a very good action. You could imagine, somebody was asking practical questions, what can you do? You could start such an action in the Netherlands, actually. And you could try to mobilize support from people with stronger positions in the universities to back these actions. And there's a problem too, but I've said enough.
You have your own mic, Wendy.
So there are really a lot of rich questions here, and I think I'll just respond to Joanna's question in the name of time about the future for democracy, and maybe it will touch some of the others. Obviously, I'm not going to answer the question, what is the future for democracy? But I do have just two things in this context that I want to say about it. Democracy is a rich and protean and used and abused word, and when I speak of it, I am not simply referring to liberal democracy, but rather to any aspiration for the people to rule themselves, really just using the etymological root of the term, the demos crassy, the people rule, something you learn in a liberal arts education. And I think that the future for it is pretty bleak, but I want to say this about that bleakness. I think one of the conceits of the colonial West has been for several centuries that we have democracy and everybody else is either anti-democratic or aspiring to democracy or could be democratic if only we pop the lid on Saddam Hussein's regime or somebody else's regime and let those democratic energies out. But we have it, we always already have it. Everybody else is some kind of outsider to it or in a temporal lag to it or civilizationally behind or excluded from it. And that conceit, of course, has done a lot of violence, but nowhere has it been more blinding than in the West itself, because what it blinds us to is the idea that we are capable of de-democratizing and not just of being always already democratic. Instead, the conceit usually assumes we're democratic and they are democratizing or would be if only. And I think it's really important for us to be able to see ourselves as de-democratizing, even if liberal democracy was always full of all kinds of hypocrisies and limitations and unrealized aspirations for the people ruling. It is also possible to pull the plug even on that dream and even on that aspiration and instead turn us into peoples of, as I'm suggesting, just masses of human capital. And I also think that it's important for us to see that as we continue to export democracy to places like Iraq, the form that it is taking is pure neoliberalization. For example, the educational systems that we have contributed there have been largely funded by companies like Monsanto and others, where it's not just even training human capital, but it's a specific kind of integration of people into a debt-financed world agricultural import-export economy and a destruction, in the case of the Monsanto-based universities, a destruction of sustainable wheat farming in the Fertile Crescent. So I think in thinking about the future of democracy, it is really important for us to as people who can contribute to this conversation, people who did have the privilege of a liberal arts education, I think it's really important for us to not go along with the idea that we are always already Democrats, and then there's them, but rather to bust it up at every turn and then ask, what does it mean to be educated for democracy today? And, you know, I don't just mean that in a kind of big rhetorical way. I mean asking it very concretely and also, you know, asking ourselves as educators whether we're engaged in that or whether we're engaged in something more self-indulgent. And again, I don't think it's the only thing we ought to be doing, but I think it's one thing we ought to do. I think it also addresses questions about the relationship of fascism and neoliberalism today, because to go back to the Greek question, you know, it doesn't take a lot to figure out the relationship between rising fascist sentiments and an anti-historical and anti-intellectual sensibility that itself is cultivated in the stew of neoliberalism. Enough, it's lunchtime.
Thank you very much. What started with a note of pessimism grew to a crescendo of at least affirmative politics. The panel will get the little present as they step down, and the doors at the back will miraculously open, and lunch will be served. We start really strictly at 1:15, so it's a short lunch break. Thank this marvelous, splendid, lucid panel. Well done.